Warfare has shaped human history in profound and far-reaching ways. It has driven technological progress, forged empires, and toppled civilizations. The tools of war have evolved from rudimentary weapons used by early humans to sophisticated machines that can deliver destruction from thousands of miles away. This documentary will trace the development of warfare, from the use of swords and spears in the ancient world to modern-day drones and cyber warfare. As we progress, we will see how each era's advances in weaponry and tactics reflect not only the technological state of the time, but also the broader social, political, and economic contexts in which these conflicts occurred. Warfare in ancient times was deeply rooted in hand-to-hand combat. The tools of war were simple, yet the strategies employed by ancient civilizations laid the foundation for military tactics that would be used for centuries to come. One of the most iconic weapons in human history is the sword. In civilizations from ancient Mesopotamia to feudal Japan, the sword was not just a weapon but a symbol of power, status, and honor. For early armies, swords were typically made of bronze or iron, with designs tailored to the fighting styles of different cultures. The Roman gladius. The Roman legions used short swords known as gladius, ideal for thrusting in close combat. Roman military success was built around disciplined formations, such as the testudo, tortoise formation, where soldiers used their shields to create a wall while thrusting with their short swords through the gaps. Celtic longswords. In contrast, the Celtic warriors of ancient Britain and Gaul wielded long, slashing swords, designed to cut through enemy armor and flesh with sweeping strokes. These swords were often adorned with intricate designs, highlighting the importance of the warrior class in Celtic society. Spears were among the most versatile weapons in the ancient world. They could be used in close combat, thrown as javelins, or employed as part of a defensive formation. The Greek phalanx. Perhaps the most famous example of spear usage was the Greek phalanx, a tightly packed formation of soldiers armed with long spears up to 18 feet long and large shields. The success of the phalanx depended on the discipline and cohesion of the soldiers. In battles such as Marathon and Thermopylae, the Greeks successfully used this formation to defeat numerically superior forces, relying on teamwork and tactics over individual heroism. Hoplite warfare. Hoplites, the citizen soldiers of ancient Greece, carried spears and heavy shields called aspis, and they often fought in the phalanx formation. Their battles were typically short, brutal, and decisive, with victory often determined by which army could maintain its formation the longest. Chariots were a major breakthrough in ancient warfare, giving armies increased mobility and speed. Chariot warfare first emerged in Mesopotamia around 3000 BCE and spread to Egypt, China, and India. Egyptian chariots. In ancient Egypt, chariots played a crucial role in the military campaigns of pharaohs such as Ramses II. At the Battle of Kadesh, 1274 BCE, one of the largest chariot battles in history, Ramses used fast, lightweight chariots to outmaneuver the Hittite army. Chariots carried archers who could rain arrows down on infantry, disrupting enemy lines before closing in for melee combat. Transition to cavalry. Over time, horses became more central to warfare, and cavalry replaced chariots as the dominant mobile force on the battlefield. Mounted warriors could strike quickly and retreat, giving armies unprecedented flexibility. The Persian Empire's cavalry, the Parthian cataphracts, were heavily armored and feared for their ability to launch devastating charges and use Parthian shots, shooting arrows while retreating on horseback. The medieval period was marked by the rise of feudalism and the prominence of heavily armored knights. It was also a time of significant developments in fortification and siege warfare, as empires expanded and sought to protect their territory. In Europe, knights came to symbolize the apex of medieval military might. These noble warriors, encased in heavy armor and wielding lances and swords, dominated the battlefield from horseback. The role of the knight. Knights were typically drawn from the aristocracy and were trained from a young age in the arts of war. Their ability to fight on horseback gave them a significant advantage in open-field battles, where a well-timed cavalry charge could break enemy lines. However, knights were also expensive to maintain, limiting their numbers and necessitating support from peasant levies and infantry. The Battle of Hastings, 1066. A prime example of knightly warfare is the Battle of Hastings, where William the Conqueror's Norman cavalry played a decisive role in defeating the Anglo-Saxon army. William's forces used mounted knights to repeatedly attack and feign retreat, luring the English soldiers into breaking formation, leading to their defeat. The medieval period saw the widespread construction of castles and fortified cities. These structures were not just military installations, they were symbols of power and control over the surrounding countryside. Medieval castles such as the Tower of London or the Croix des Chevaliers in the Crusader states, were designed to withstand prolonged sieges. With thick stone walls, moats, drawbridges, and towers, castles were nearly impregnable to most forms of attack. They served as command centers, residences for the nobility, and refugees for local populations during times of war. As fortifications became stronger, so too did the weapons used to breach them. Medieval armies employed a variety of siege engines designed to destroy castle walls or undermine their defenses. The trebuchet. One of the most famous siege weapons of the medieval period was the trebuchet. Unlike earlier catapults, which used torsion for power, the trebuchet used a counterweight system, allowing it to hurl massive projectiles over great distances. It could fire stones, burning tar, or even diseased animals into besieged fortresses to demoralize the defenders. Siege tactics. Successful sieges often involved a combination of brute force and strategy. Attackers might try to tunnel under walls, sapping, build siege towers to scale walls, or blockade a castle to starve its inhabitants into submission. The Siege of Constantinople in 1453 is a classic example, where the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II used massive cannons to breach the city's walls, leading to the fall of the Byzantine Empire. The introduction of gunpowder to Europe in the 14th century triggered a seismic shift in military strategy and tactics. With gunpowder came firearms, cannons, and the end of the dominance of the armored knight. Early cannons were large, cumbersome, and often inaccurate, but they had one key advantage: they could demolish the walls of even the strongest castles. The fall of Constantinople, 1453. Cannons played a decisive role in the siege of Constantinople, where the Ottomans used enormous bronze cannons to bombard the city's once impenetrable walls. These cannons, designed by the engineer Urban, could fire 600-pound stone balls, shattering the fortifications that had withstood centuries of attack. The fall of Constantinople marked the end of the medieval era and the beginning of a new age of warfare. Development of field artillery. By the 16th century, cannons became more mobile, with smaller, lighter versions deployed on battlefields. This development allowed armies to bring artillery to bear on enemy formations, smashing infantry and cavalry alike with devastating barrages of iron shot. Firearms, particularly muskets and arquebuses, changed the face of infantry combat. While early firearms were slow to reload and had limited range, they could penetrate the heaviest armor, making knights obsolete. Pike and shot formations. The combination of firearms and traditional spears led to the development of pike and shot tactics, where musketeers would fire volleys at the enemy while being protected by rows of pikemen. This mixed formation was widely used in the 16th and 17th centuries, most notably by Spanish tercios, who became the dominant military force in Europe during this period. The Battle of Pavia, 1525. The Battle of Pavia in Italy marked one of the first major victories where firearms played a decisive role. The French heavy cavalry, long the dominant force in European warfare, was decimated by Spanish infantry armed with arquebuses, highlighting the shift from melee combat to ranged warfare. The development of ship-mounted cannons revolutionized naval warfare. Throughout the 16th and 17th centuries, European powers competed for dominance at sea, with ships bristling with cannons engaging in battles that decided the fate of empires. Spanish Armada, 1588. One of the most famous naval battles of this era was the defeat of the Spanish Armada by the English fleet in 1588. The English relied on lighter, more maneuverable ships equipped with cannons that could be fired in quick succession, allowing them to outmaneuver the larger Spanish galleons. This victory secured England's naval supremacy and opened the door to the expansion of the British Empire. The 20th century brought about a new era of warfare, total war, where entire nations mobilized their resources and civilians became targets. With the advent of mechanized warfare, the scale and devastation of war grew exponentially. World War I, 1914 to 1918, was unlike any war that had come before. It introduced new weapons and technologies that made mass casualties the norm. The war quickly devolved into a brutal stalemate of trench warfare. Machine guns. Machine guns, such as the Maxim gun, dominated the Western Front. These weapons could fire hundreds of rounds per minute, mowing down waves of infantry and making frontal assaults nearly suicidal. Machine guns contributed to the creation of trench systems, as soldiers sought cover from relentless fire. Artillery. Artillery barrages became the defining feature of World War I. Massive guns could fire shells over several miles, pulverizing enemy trenches and infrastructure. The Battle of Verdun and the Battle of the Somme were characterized by relentless artillery bombardments that left entire landscapes scarred and desolate. Tanks. The deadlock of trench warfare led to the development of tanks, armored vehicles capable of crossing no man's land and breaking through enemy lines. The first tanks, such as the British Mark I, were slow and prone to mechanical failure, but they represented the beginning of mechanized warfare. World War II, 1939 to 1945, built upon the lessons of the First World War, with tanks, aircraft, and submarines becoming the key components of military strategy. This conflict saw warfare reach new heights of mobility and destruction. Blitzkrieg tactics. The German Blitzkrieg lightning war strategy emphasized speed and surprise. Using a combination of tanks, mechanized infantry, and close air support, German forces rapidly overwhelmed enemy defenses, as seen in the invasions of Poland and France. The panzer divisions, supported by Stuka dive bombers, exemplified the synergy between armored ground forces and air power. Aerial bombing campaigns. Air warfare became a central feature of World War II. The bombing campaigns carried out by both the Allies and the Axis powers targeted not only military installations, but also civilian populations. The bombing of London during the Blitz, the destruction of Dresden, and the firebombing of Tokyo were all part of a strategy to break the enemy's will to fight. Nuclear weapons. The culmination of World War II came with the development and use of the atomic bomb. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945 by the United States not only brought about the end of the war, but also ushered in the nuclear age. For the first time, humanity had the means to destroy entire cities, and potentially the entire world, in a matter of seconds. The Cold War, 1947 to 1991, was defined by the threat of nuclear conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union. Although direct confrontation between the superpowers was avoided, the period saw rapid advances in military technology, with new forms of warfare emerging. During the Cold War, both the United States and the Soviet Union developed intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, capable of delivering nuclear warheads across thousands of miles. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction, MAD, held that any nuclear attack would be met with overwhelming retaliation, effectively deterring either side from launching a first strike. Cuban Missile Crisis, 1962. The Cuban Missile Crisis was the closest the world ever came to nuclear war. When the Soviet Union attempted to place nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from the U.S. mainland, it led to a tense standoff between the two superpowers. The crisis was eventually resolved diplomatically, but it underscored the dangers of the nuclear arms race. Nuclear proliferation. In addition to the U.S. and the Soviet Union, other nations, including China, France, and the United Kingdom, developed nuclear weapons. By the 1970s, nuclear-armed submarines and missile silos made it possible for nations to maintain a second strike capability, further entrenching the doctrine of deterrence. As the world became increasingly interconnected through computers and the internet, a new form of warfare emerged: cyber warfare. Instead of bombs and bullets, cyber warfare involves attacks on a nation's digital infrastructure. Stuxnet attack, 2010. One of the most famous examples of cyber warfare is the Stuxnet virus, a cyber attack allegedly carried out by the United States and Israel against Iran's nuclear program. Stuxnet targeted the computer systems controlling Iran's uranium enrichment centrifuges, causing them to malfunction. This marked the beginning of a new era of covert cyber operations. Election interference and cyber espionage. In the 21st century, cyber attacks have become a key tool in espionage and political interference. Nations deploy hackers to infiltrate foreign governments, steal sensitive information, and even influence elections. Cyber warfare blurs the line between state and non-state actors, with criminal organizations and rogue nations using hacking to achieve political and financial objectives. Drones, or unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, represent the most recent revolution in warfare. Capable of conducting surveillance and launching precision strikes, drones allow military forces to engage enemies without putting soldiers in harm's way. The War on Terror. The U.S. has extensively used drones in its war on terror, particularly in regions such as Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, and Somalia. Drones like the Predator and Reaper can loiter over a battlefield for hours, tracking targets and launching Hellfire missiles with pinpoint accuracy. Drone strikes have been used to eliminate high-profile targets, such as terrorist leaders Osama bin Laden and Qasem Soleimani. Ethical concerns and the future of AI in warfare. The rise of drones has raised serious ethical concerns. The remote nature of drone warfare distances operators from the battlefield, potentially lowering the threshold for the use of force. In addition, the development of autonomous drones and AI-powered weapon systems poses new challenges, as the decision to kill could one day be made by machines rather than humans. The history of warfare is a story of technological innovation, strategic evolution, and the ever-increasing scale of conflict. From the hand-forged swords of ancient warriors to the unmanned drones of today, each advancement in weaponry has reshaped not only the battlefield, but also the societies that produce and wield these tools of war. As technology continues to progress, the future of warfare may involve even more remote, autonomous, and cyber-based conflicts. However, with each new weapon comes new moral and ethical dilemmas. The question is no longer just about how we fight, but what kind of world we are creating as warfare becomes more detached, more automated, and potentially more devastating than ever before. In the end, the history of warfare is a reflection of humanity's struggle for power, survival, and control. As we look to the future, it is crucial to remember the lessons of the past and consider the consequences of the technologies we develop for war.